The city has been burning for 3 days, and the smoke is so thick it swallows the sun. Nanjing, once the most magnificent city in southern China, is a slaughterhouse wrapped in fire. The Qing army has been outside the walls for 2 years, squeezing tighter with every passing month. Inside, the streets are clogged with the starving and the dying. The garrison has eaten the horses, then the rats, then things people don't talk about afterward. You are a soldier manning the northern wall when it finally gives way. Not from cannon fire, but from a tunnel packed with explosives the enemy has been digging for weeks. The ground shudders, the wall erupts upward in a column of smoke and stone and screaming men, and before the dust settles, thousands of Imperial troops are already pouring through the gap. The killing lasts a week. 100,000 people die before the city goes quiet. It is 1864. The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, the most lethal religious state in human history, has just collapsed, and somewhere inside the rubble of his palace, his founder is already dead. He never saw it coming. Or rather, he had spent the last few years issuing divine proclamations from his throne room while his people starved in the streets below, which is a management style that tends to end badly. His name was Xiuquan. Before he became the self-declared younger brother of Jesus Christ and ignited a war that killed more people than the First World War, he was just a young man who couldn't pass his exams. To understand what that meant in 1830s China, you need to understand what the exam was. The Imperial Civil Service examination was the most brutal meritocracy ever devised. Any man, regardless of birth, could, in theory, sit the tests and rise through the ranks of the most powerful bureaucracy on Earth. The catch was that passing required years, sometimes decades, of memorizing the Confucian classics word perfect and writing essays in a highly stylized format that had barely changed in 1,000 years. Most candidates failed. Many failed for life. But for ambitious men from poor families, there was no other ladder. Hong was a Hakka, part of an ethnic minority who had migrated into Guangdong province centuries earlier and never quite belonged, barred from the best land, sneered at by local elites. He was clearly bright. His village scraped together money to educate him. He sat the provincial exam in Guangzhou at 15, failed, tried again at 18, failed, tried again at 22, failed. After the third failure, he walked home through the summer heat, lay down, and did not get up for 40 days. What happened during those 40 days is one of the strangest pivot points in human history. Hong had visions. In them, an old man with a golden beard gave him a sword and a mission to slay the demons plaguing China. A younger man stood beside the old man and called Hong his brother. Hong woke up, went back to farming, and filed the visions away. Then, 6 years later, a relative handed him a Christian pamphlet, a Protestant missionary tract translated into Chinese, and Hong read it and felt the ground shift beneath him. The old man in his vision was God the Father. The younger man was Jesus Christ, which meant Hong was the Son of God's younger brother, sent to Earth on a divine mission to purge China of demons and establish a heavenly kingdom. He had not failed his exams 4 times. He had been selected. What followed would sound impossible if 30 million deaths did not confirm it happened. Hong began baptizing followers in a bucket of water in his backyard. He preached to anyone who would listen. The Qing dynasty was demonic. Confucius was demonic. The Buddhist and Taoist temples were demonic. And the demons had to be destroyed before the kingdom of heaven could be built on Chinese soil. His audience was not hard to find. By 1850, southern China was a disaster zone. The opium wars had forced open Chinese ports to British trade, and the resulting silver drain had wrecked the economy. Drought and flooding had devastated harvests for years. The Qing bureaucracy, rotten with corruption, was too busy skimming tax collections to govern. Peasants were furious and desperate and looking for someone to explain why the world had turned against them. A man who promised that their suffering was demonic in origin and that he had a sword from God to fix it was exactly what the moment required. By 1851, Hong had tens of thousands of followers. He declared the founding of the Taiping Tianguo, the Heavenly Kingdom of Great Peace. Then he picked up the sword. You are standing in the market square of a mid-sized Guangdong town when the Taiping arrive. You hear them before you see them, a low roar of 10,000 feet on the road, drums, and something that sounds almost like hymns. They come around the bend in columns that seem to have no end. Men, women, entire families with pikes and matchlocks and captured cannons hauled on wooden carts. The officers wear yellow turbans and carry banners embroidered with the words Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. The man at the front raises his hand and the column stops. He looks at the Qing official waiting at the gate with a small detachment of soldiers. The official draws himself up and begins reading from a proclamation. He barely gets 3 sentences in before the first cannon fires. The wall crumbles. You run. Within 2 years, the Taiping Army, which had started as a backyard baptism club, sweeps north through 5 provinces, absorbs hundreds of thousands of peasant fighters, and in 1853 captures Nanjing, the old imperial capital and the second greatest city in China. Hong declares it his heavenly capital and moves in. At its peak, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom controls territory roughly the size of France and governs somewhere between 20 and 30 million people. It is, by any measure, a state, a very strange state. Opium is banned, alcohol is banned, prostitution, gambling, and foot-binding are banned. Women can own land and serve in segregated military units, a concept so radical that visiting Western observers could not decide whether to be impressed or disturbed. The old Confucian texts are banned. Buddhist and Taoist temples are smashed. Replacing all of it is a new Christian-inflected theology written personally by Hong Xiuquan, which increasingly diverges from anything a Protestant missionary would recognize. Hong has been receiving new revelations, he explains. The Bible contains errors. He has been correcting them. Western missionaries arrived in Nanjing expecting allies and left baffled. One American minister sat with Hong for hours discussing theology, walked out into the street, and wrote in his diary that he was not sure he had been speaking to a Christian at all. What he had witnessed was something more like a state religion, built from Christian raw materials, with Hong at the center, his decrees treated as scripture, and his critics treated as demons requiring elimination. The irony was almost too clean. Protestant missionaries had spent decades circulating tracts in China, hoping to plant the seed of the gospel. They had, by accident, handed a failed exam taker the blueprint for the deadliest theocratic regime of the 19th century. The Qing, meanwhile, were fighting for their survival. The imperial army had been losing battles to the Taiping for years with humiliating consistency, and Beijing was beginning to understand that the dynasty might not outlast this. Help came from an unlikely direction. A young American adventurer named Frederick Townsend Ward showed up in Shanghai in 1960, offering to train and lead a mercenary force against the Taiping for a fee, which was either entrepreneurial genius or suicidal recklessness, and turned out to be both. His ever-victorious army, a few thousand Chinese soldiers drilled in Western tactics and armed with modern weapons, began winning battles the imperial army couldn't. Ward was killed in action in 1962, which settles the diagnosis. He was replaced by a British officer named Charles Gordon, who turned the force into something genuinely effective. The Western powers had quietly decided that a stable Qing China was better for business than a heavenly kingdom that smashed trading infrastructure and refused to honor commercial treaties. God's younger brother was bad for the ports. By then, the Heavenly Kingdom was destroying itself from the inside. Hong had retreated into his palace, issuing edicts and revelations, reportedly smoking opium in private while publicly condemning it, surrounding himself with concubines under a theological framework he had invented for exactly this purpose. His generals were murdering each other. A catastrophic internal purge in 1856, the Nanjing incident, killed thousands of Taiping leaders and gutted the military command structure in a single month. Cities under Taiping control were not the peaceful kingdom of the pamphlets. They were places where people disappeared for theological infractions, where the food was running out, where you kept your mouth shut and hoped that heaven wasn't watching too closely. The gap between the kingdom as advertised and the kingdom as delivered was roughly the size of the Pacific Ocean. When the Qing army and Gordon's ever-victorious army closed the ring around Nanjing in 1864, it was already over in every way that mattered. Xiuquan died in June, probably from illness, possibly from eating grass when the food ran out. The historical record goes politely vague on this point. When the walls came down, the Qing showed no mercy. The city that had been the heavenly capital was emptied by the sword. The final death toll sits between 20 and 30 million people, making the Taiping Rebellion the deadliest civil war in recorded history and the third deadliest conflict of any kind, after the Second World War and the Mongol conquests. It is almost completely unknown outside China because it happened to the wrong civilization in the wrong century, documented primarily by people whose main interest was whether the ports were open. The Qing won, but the victory was poison. To defeat the Taiping, Beijing had been forced to hand military power to regional warlords, and those warlords never gave it back. The central authority that had survived for 2 centuries quietly fractured. 47 years after the fall of Nanjing, the dynasty collapsed. The structural irony that Hong would have appreciated if he had been capable of appreciating anything by the end. Both the communists and the nationalists later claimed him as a proto-revolutionary, a peasant who rose against dynastic oppression. Mao Zedong studied the Taiping Rebellion obsessively, was fascinated by how Hong had mobilized the rural poor, and genuinely believed he had learned from Hong's mistakes. He had, in some ways. In others, he repeated every single one of them at larger scale. The pattern, charismatic leader, divine mission, peasant army, revolutionary state, internal purges, retreat from reality, turns out to be remarkably durable across centuries and continents. The exam Hong failed in 1837 was testing whether he could recite what others had written. He never passed that test. What he discovered, to everyone's catastrophic misfortune, was that he was extraordinarily good at getting other people to recite what he wrote instead.